My name is Emily. I'm 28 years old and single. 17 years ago, my mother Jenny and my sister Catherine came to live with our single father. I lost my mother at a young age and always longed for a maternal figure, so I tried my best to please my beautiful mother. I was also thrilled to finally have a sister, as I had always wanted siblings. When they visited, both my mother and sister praised our home, saying it was a wonderful place. Our house was a stylish two-story brick-built Western-style house, located in a high-end residential area. I believed that we would be a happy family of 4, living in this house. My mother recognized my efforts and started asking me for help with various tasks. By the age of 11, I had become proficient in all household chores. However, my sister Catherine seemed to resent me for being favored by our father and was always mean to me. She would often say hurtful things like, "I've never seen a lazy person like you. That's why you're so fat." Yes, I had been chubby since I was young, and it was a complex for me. But in my opinion, my slim sister was the lazy one, and I didn't believe that laziness was related to weight. I couldn't talk back to her because I would be accused of being mean, or she would tell our parents she's picking on me because I'm a stepchild. So I just endured her insults silently. When I was 15 and my sister was 17, a 17-year-old boy named Tom moved in next door. Tom was handsome, and both my sister and I were aware of him. One day, while I was cleaning the garden, Tom praised me, saying, "Emily, you're always doing household chores." "That's great." My sister later accused me, "You're just pretending to be good because Tom is watching. You're really good at this, aren't you? Don't get carried away, okay? There's no way Tom would be interested in someone fat like you." I was used to her hurtful comments, but being called an unattractive woman by Tom hurt me deeply. It seemed like my sister had a crush on Tom, but nothing ever came of it. She eventually got married to someone else and left our house a year ago. Soon after, my father fell ill and passed away. Before his death, he called me to his sickbed and firmly held my hand, saying, "Emily, please take care of your mother. She's always been a housewife and doesn't know much about the world. I leave management of the property to you." After my father's death, when settling his estate, I discovered he had many debts, and even with life insurance, there was hardly any inheritance left. Moreover, there was a mortgage of $2,000 per month on the house with 5 years remaining, which I had to take over. Although I'm a full-time employee at a major company, I have no confidence in my appearance and dislike meeting people, so I work from home. I was able to take on the mortgage. I decided to give my mother a monthly allowance and pocket money out of my own salary. This is all? What about his inheritance? My mother frowned. There wasn't much left in inheritance. "So, could you manage within this limit?" My mother seemed somewhat skeptical, as if she doubted me. Although I was disappointed that she didn't believe me, I thought it would be easier once the $2,000 loan was paid off, and until then, I just needed to keep doing my best. On the other hand, my sister Catherine, who had married and left home, often returned to complain that her husband didn't do any housework at all. One day, while I was cleaning the hallway, I saw my mother secretly giving my sister one of my father's cherished brass ornaments in the living room, saying, "This should fetch some money." Recently, I had noticed things disappearing, and now I realized it was because of this. I understood that my luxury-loving sister had been frequently visiting for this reason. But really, is there no inheritance? Isn't she hiding something? My sister clearly suspected me. I thought she could give us the living expenses because of the inheritance. She just sits at home clicking away at her computer. "You should manage everything, Mom." It's strange for such a lazy person to be in charge. The living expenses weren't coming from the inheritance, but it seemed my mother thought otherwise. I had told her about my remote work, but she probably saw it as just playing around. It was sad to see my father's favorite items disappearing, but since it was difficult to manage on my salary alone, I decided to turn a blind eye to their actions. One day, while I was preparing a meal, my sister Catherine came up to me and asked, "Hey, how long are you going to be in need?" "What? I'm working, you know." "Lies. You're always at home, aren't you?" "Dad's passed away, you know. Isn't it about time you started working?" What? I've been working for 6 years now. My sister, perhaps frustrated, slammed her hand against the wall, making me jump. Stop lying? Mom says the same thing. Wondering what you are doing wandering around every day. Wandering around? I'm doing the housework like this. Just housework, right? Don't take it easy, getting fatter and fatter. You've always been lazy since the past. My sister says this, but in reality, I do most of the housework, while my mother enjoys a lavish lifestyle with spa visits, theater outings with friends, living as she did when my father was alive. I suspect that the lifestyle can't be supported by the living expenses I provide, so she's probably selling father's belongings. When I kept quiet, my sister, perhaps thinking she'd hit the nail on the head, pressed me further. Really? You should give more of the inheritance to Mom, shouldn't you? That allowance is ridiculous. No, it's because there's hardly any inheritance left. Stop lying about that too. It seems they both decided that I'm hiding my father's inheritance. Just because you're his real daughter, you think you can do that? Mom is the one who's been supporting Dad all this time, you know? I didn't know what to say to make them believe me. As I thought about convincing my mother and showing her the reality of our financial situation, news came that my sister was pregnant. My mother was very happy but also worried. Catherine's husband doesn't do any housework, does he? I wonder if the baby will be born safely. Every day my mother would say such things and nervously keep in touch with my sister. Thinking that speaking up and making my mother anxious would sadden my father, I decided to remain silent. I believe that families should help and support each other, but all I could do was endure, and it had become a habit. As my sister's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she reached 7 months, she came to our house and said she had something to discuss with my mother and me. I want to have my baby back at home. My mother immediately agreed. Of course you should give birth here. I'm worried about my first birth, so I want to come a month in advance. And I want my husband to stay here for a while too. You know, he can't do household chores. The thought of my brother-in-law coming made me feel a bit blue. I didn't like my brother-in-law, who always said, "A woman isn't a woman if she isn't beautiful." My mother, unconcerned, said, yes, that's fine. Stay as long as you like. You shouldn't be hindered in his work. He's an elite, after all. As the two of them talked excitedly, I just nodded silently. Then my sister glanced at me and said, "Now, this is the important part. I don't want that need over there to stay here." As if they had agreed beforehand, my mother, without surprise, continued, "That's right. Our house isn't very big. It's also a bit much for a young daughter to be under the same roof as a man, right?" As she casually advanced the conversation, I panicked. "Wait, so where should I stay?" As I flustered, my sister became furious. "Figure it out yourself. You've been in need for so long," she yelled with great force. I was too scared to speak when my mother said, "Now there are still 2 months left. Take your time to think, okay?" "Yes, how long should I be away?" "About 2 months?" My sister sighed at my foolish question and started tapping the table. "Let me put it more directly, since you don't seem to get the hint. Basically, we don't need a need in this house." Does that mean... Don't you get it? My sister started getting irritated. My mother took over the conversation. "Well, Emily has been saying she's doing remote work, but to me she just seemed like a need. She hardly gives any money, and who knows what she's doing with the inheritance." "No, that's because there's no inheritance left. If there's no inheritance, how are you living?" "'Cause I'm working, that's how." My sister and mother exchanged looks as if to say, "Here we go again." "So, if you're working, it won't be a problem for you to move out, right?" My sister seemed thrilled with her idea. My mother joined in, and we won the need for a remote walk to leave. "Can I leave? Really? Is it okay? Are you okay with leaving it to my brother-in-law?" My sister, looking triumphant, said, "Of course," with a beaming smile. I realized I could escape the burden of the $2,000 loan and felt elated. I had been taking care of the house and my mother as my father asked, but honestly, the $2,000 loan was a strain. As work got busier, the household chores and errands my mother asked of me became a pain. Living alone would mean I wouldn't have to take care of her. If my sister and her husband could look after my mother, I would have fulfilled my promise to my father, I immediately tried to change the mortgage to my brother-in-law's name at the bank, but they said I couldn't transfer the mortgage unless the person was deceased. The only option was to sell the house. I thought of proposing to my brother-in-law to buy it, as my sister said he's an elite and could afford it for about $150,000, which would pay off the loan. I prepared documents to this effect and handed them to my sister, along with the inheritance paperwork. My sister, without really looking at the contents, grinned and said, "We should have done this from the start," holding the papers joyfully. I then quickly found a cheap apartment, contracted with movers, and started moving out. Tom, my neighbor, saw this and was surprised, asking, "What's happening? Emily, are you moving out?" Honestly, part of my attachment to the house was the sadness of not being able to see him anymore. "Yes, I'm moving out. Thank you for everything. My sister and her husband will be moving in. Please take care of them." "Are you getting married?" His voice sounded somewhat sad, making me nervous. No, no one would want someone like me. I'm not like my sister. I mean, my looks are not that good, I said with a smile, and he stared at me intently, saying, "That's not true." Tut. My heart raced, and I must have turned bright red. Feeling too embarrassed, I only managed to say thank you before hastily leaving the scene. I felt Tom's gaze on my back, but couldn't bring myself to look back. For several weeks, I was enjoying living alone. The apartment was cheaply made, but I didn't have to do errands for anyone and could use my salary however I liked. It was a comfortable space. I realized that I'd always been trying too hard to maintain the balance in my family. Since my brother-in-law hadn't contacted me about buying the house, I asked a real estate agent to follow up. Then I received a call from my sister. "What do you mean? Buy the house?" Apparently, neither my brother-in-law nor my sister had properly read the documents. "You want to live there, right? If so, you'll have to buy it." "Wait, wasn't this a house you already owned?" "I thought you got it from the inheritance." "There was a remaining loan? Can brother-in-law afford $150,000? I think that's quite cheap." "What? Cheap? We were supposed to get it for free." I was astonished by her assumption that they could get the house for free. $150,000 was a bargain for that location and house. That's not how it works. Anyway, if he's not buying, I'll look for another buyer. They might offer a higher price. Wait, hold on. Let me pass the phone to him. My brother-in-law came on the line. "Hello, this is different from what I heard. I don't know what you were told, but if you're not buying and still want to live there, you'll need to pay rent." "How much?" "The mortgage repayment is $2,000. I can't pay that much. At most, $500. You won't find a renter for that price for this property. Anyway, I didn't hear about this. I'm not paying a penny." With that, the call ended. I tried calling and emailing my sister and mother multiple times, but neither responded. With no other choice, I asked the real estate agent to arrange the sale of the house. I went to the house with the agent to get it appraised. The garden was untainted and the windows were dirty, a stark contrast to when I was living there. When the agent and I entered the house, my sister, her husband, and my mother looked shocked. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean?" "I'm selling this place." The real estate agent, knowing the situation, explained everything to them. Knowing the situation, the agent stepped forward and said, "You're trespassing, so please leave soon, okay? Otherwise we'll have to call the police." My mother was trembling with fear, her legs shaking. My sister turned to her husband and yelled, "You said everything was settled, right?" "What I came here for was because I was told we could live for free. And now you're saying we have to pay $50 million or $200,000 a month? That's ridiculous." Apparently they hadn't really discussed anything. My mother collapsed on the spot, weeping. "So what now? Do we have to leave this place?" "It's the consequence of a life spent depending on others." Annoyed with our mother, my sister began to shout, "This is happening because you're not strong, Mom. You should have kept an eye on your husband and secured the inheritance. You're so foolish." My mother, surprised at first, suddenly lashed out. "What are you saying? Your husband, the so-called elite, is just a contract worker at a subcontractor's factory. I know that, I have an eye for men." My sister recoiled at our mother's outburst, and my brother-in-law awkwardly scratched his head. I was deceived too, but after getting married, I found out he's just a contract worker in a factory. You're a foolish one. Always focusing on your appearance, never doing anything for the house, and then ending up with a man who can't earn properly. You're really useless. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing my mother's true nature. My sister was wailing like a madwoman, while my brother-in-law cowered in a corner. What were my father and I, who always served this mother, thinking? At the same time, I felt relieved that I could now leave this place with peace of mind. Leaving them to their argument, I stepped outside with the real estate agent, and then Tom appeared in the garden. I've missed the pleasure of looking at your garden since you left, Emily. His intense gaze made my heart race. But a beautiful sister has arrived, hasn't she? I mentioned my sister in my usual way. Tom said with a look of distaste, "Actually, she tried to make a move on me. She's quite something." It seemed my sister had tried to seduce Tom despite her pregnancy. I awkwardly said, well, this house is going to be sold. I don't think you'll see my sister again." To reassure him, "I won't see you either, Emily." Following that, Tom and I started dating, and after 2 years of courtship, we got married. He'd always been watching me, working hard for my family. Since my sister's family and my mother continued to live carelessly in that house, they were eventually evicted by the police, called by the real estate agent. According to Tom, it was quite a commotion. The house sold for $300,000, so in accordance with the law, I gave half of the remaining $150,000 to my mother and the other half to my sister. Instead of using it to find a good place to live, both of them apparently used it to pay off debts incurred from their frivolous spending and quickly ran out of money. Their eagerness for the inheritance was apparently to settle their debts. Now they live in a 2DK apartment, rented by my brother-in-law, with my mother and the newborn baby, all 4 of them cramped together. When I occasionally check on them, my mother starts crying about how inconvenient the small apartment is and how my sister and her husband mistreat her. My sister calls our mother and is constantly shouting hysterically at her disobedient child. Perhaps due to this stress, my sister has completely lost her former beauty and has become much heavier than me. I have never seen my brother-in-law around, as he seems to find it hard to stay at home, with a family full of complaints and without someone to balance it. It feels like they might fall apart soon, but it's no longer my concern. Oh yes, after getting married I moved into Tom's house, and now live my life overlooking my former home. The old family home now houses a new family, and I can hear the lively voices of children. While continuing my remote work, I listen to those sounds and hope that one day I too will have children.